particular iteration of New Life that I pastor is almost 22 years old.
Yep.
Okay, it's an old wineskin. You know, we've got, but it's not a bad one. At least I don't think so.
No.
All right, we're here today, and man, I got a privilege today. I have the privilege today of having with me my friend Dave Drury, who is the, tell me your title at headquarters again.
The Chief of Staff.
Chief of Staff for the General Superintendent of the Wesleyan Church. And Dave and I have known each other for a long time. I'm not going to say that we've ever been like best buds and vacation together, but we've known each other for a long time, and I have respected your work from a distance for a very long time. You've planted churches. You've worked on staff at churches, you've worked at headquarters, you've worked with a district, I believe, at one point. You've written a book called Soul Shift, which, as far as I can tell, is still the best-selling book Wesleyan Publishing has ever put out and published. You did that with Steve Deneff, who is, by the way, probably one of the best preachers I've ever sat under. So, dude, you are an impressive human being, and I'm thrilled to have you here today. So
it's good to be here.
Well, I want to have.
After you said all that, I'm kind of more impressed with myself than I was today. I should be around you more.
You see,
nice.
I want to have a conversation with you about so many things, but let me just say, as we jump into this conversation, our conversation will probably trend toward more of a churchy, pastor, denominational kind of conversation because that's the world we live in. I work closely with headquarters a good bit, so that's kind of the world we talk through when we're in. So if our church folks get a little lost in this, they can come talk to me later, and I'll try to catch them up. But because we're going to use some church world conversation and words. So let's start here because we're together because we're working on an initial conference with Dwight Nash and with John West on mobilizing the church. So let's just start here. There is, I believe, and let me get you to comment on this, I believe inside the church, inside of Christianity, especially inside of Christian academia, there is this aversion to the idea or the word evangelism. We don't talk about it anymore. We've gotten rid of it in all of our printed things, but still people need to come to a relationship with the Lord because that's where discipleship starts. So talk to me about evangelism, how we think of it, how we see it, and how it connects to discipleship.
Yeah, and you mentioned the churchy part of it, but this is a real basic thing for every Christian in every country at all times. And that's that all of us have the opportunity and the joy and the call and the authority given to us by Jesus to make disciples.
Right.
And I love the way Jesus just calls us to go and make disciples. And in that, the making of disciples is both what has traditionally been called evangelism,
right?
Having conversations with people that are yet to have a relationship with Jesus and introducing to that and helping them move into relationship with Jesus. And what has traditionally been called discipleship, the idea that somebody experiences that process of becoming more and more like Christ, or the rest of the Great Commission, which says, teaching them to obey all that I have commanded you. Right. So that whole idea of what has traditionally been called evangelism discipleship, I think a better way to talk about it is the way Jesus talked about it, which is go and make disciples. And the reality is that's something we all do and get to do. And whether we know it or not, we're already having conversations where we work, where we play, where we live, where we learn. If we're just a student, my teenage daughters at their high school, they are already engaging with people in kind of evangelistic type connections and relationship. And what they do can make disciples. And so I would just say, though we can think about it more academically or more like concepts, this is really just about behaviors. It's about how we live our lives to make a disciple. And I would hate for us to kind of divorce those two ideas. The reality is, a lot of evangelism could be considered as pre-discipleship.
Right.
The same conversations I'm having with people that have known Jesus for a year are similar to the ones I'm having with people that haven't yet crossed a line of faith or been baptized. It's really just, let's talk about Jesus and what's the next step that you want to take What do you want God to do for you?
So people inside the church have always heard this, because you're exactly right. From when I started in ministry, these two words, evangelism and discipleship, were separated. You won people to Jesus, or you taught them how to live like Jesus. These weren't the same thing. So for people who are saying, okay, well, wait a minute, if I'm having discipleship conversations before people get saved, then okay, so if that's part of salvation, then what's the best form of actually the discipleship, teaching them to obey?
Yeah, you in a way, you need to save them, or get people saved with the same thing you're saving them to.
Yes.
We do a lot of bait and switch with people.
Isn't that interesting? Yeah. I think in the past we saved them from. Mm-hmm. I love what you just said, saving them to. I'm sorry, I interrupted.
Yeah, and what we save them to is Jesus.
Right.
Not a process or an idea or an ideology or even a process or a book or blah, blah, blah. Right. Or even my model. Right. We save them to Jesus. And so we want to just give them Jesus, and then that just keeps going. That's still what you and I are doing right now is discipleship.
Right.
We're discipling one another in conversation about what Jesus cares about.
Right. Right. It's so interesting to me. The most effective forms of discipleship are always the simplest. Mm-hmm. I sat with Ralph Moore. I don't know if you were at the event we were at, but I sat with Ralph Moore and just talked to him for a minute. And Ralph Moore is personally responsible for hundreds of thousands of people finding faith. And his discipleship was, y'all get together and talk about the sermon on Sunday and ask 3 questions. What did the Spirit say to you while he was talking? What do you need to do about that? And how can I help you? This conversation.
There you go.
So it's just like that. So we talk about, and I'm just going to jump here. Before Dr. Wayne Schmidt became the general superintendent, even before then, I started having a conversation with him about, on the side, about, is it possible for an institution that grew out of a movement to ever become a movement again? Let me now, here's where we get into some of churchy terms. There are movements that happen, and they're generally very organic, and they're not, while there's organization, while there's people that press them, and while they come from places, they're generally really organic, and they're uncontrolled, and they're scary, and they're all this stuff at the same time. But what happens when a movement goes is that an institution forms around the movement. But the institution or organization necessarily hinders or hampers the movement, and long after the movement stops, the institution exists. Mm-hmm. So how now, and let's talk very specific, well, there are a lot of ways we can look at it, and I was speaking with Dr. Schmidt about specifically the Wesleyan Church, but in general, how does an institution start to move again, and how do we ultimately know we've gone back from institutionalization to movement? Because this can happen in churches too.
Yeah, so I mean, it's always wise to say, well, how did Jesus talk about this? Mm-hmm. And the way Jesus talked about it was wineskins and wine.
Right.
And the idea of there being old wineskins, which the old wine was in.
Right.
But then when you have new wine, sort of a new, fresh thing of the Spirit moving, new wine, what he called, you don't put it in an old wineskin, because then the old wineskin will burst.
Right.
Because of the expansion of the wine. This is a little bit of technical wine stuff that I'm not entirely up on, but according to what Jesus said. And then you wouldn't want to do that, so what you do is you get a new wineskin and you put the new wine into that. So in a way, the institution is old wineskins and has the old wine in it. And so some of what we need to realize is it hasn't happened before. So we need to be honest with ourselves that the old institution may not be where God moves. So what do we need to do? We need to not be restrictive of the new wine, the new move of the Spirit. We need to have structures that allow new things to start. And this goes all the way to like a local church.
Right.
Needs to be willing for there to be fresh expressions of the gospel outside the walls of the church, outside of the models of what the church has done. And this goes for everything from like a region of the church, or even the church of all North America, which I work with, or even worldwide. We need to allow there to be a whole great variety of expressing outside. Now, what could be cool is Jesus could give us some mercy as the old wine to at least be along for the ride.
Right.
And support it and take pride in it. And just like grandparents don't get to do everything their grandkids get to do, they get to watch it, they get to celebrate it, they get to support it, they get to fund it, right. And they get to be proud of it. And so I feel like that's something that we in the institution could do. The hope of the future is not the old wineskins overnight becoming new wineskins. Right. The hope would be that the Spirit moves in such a way that we just get to watch that and be a part of it, and maybe we can later on reminisce about how we were able to even help start it.
So let me try to.
I know that's very
illustrate
philosophical.
No. Let me try to put it in a practical illustration and see if we're on the same page. See if I've got this right. Mm-hmm. So let's take a local church, okay? Because really, every level of a denomination is another iteration of the local church. Because the whole thing on the ground, the local church is the point.
Exactly.
So in a local church, if you've got, let me just bust back years when you and I first started. Well, I'm older than you, but when we first started ministry.
Yeah.
So there's a group here. They don't want their worship to change, but worship's got to change to reach new people. You can't, if you try to change that worship service, you're going to break the old wineskin because it can't hold it. But if you could get that old wineskin to say, hey, can we use your space and your equipment 2 hours from now to do it a different way, and they say yes, then honestly, you don't break the old wineskin. You don't stop what was, but you start what will be.
It's why multiplication is so important.
Right.
I mentioned a moment ago grandparents. It's like, well, that's just biological multiplication.
Right.
The church needs to start new wineskins to be containers for the new wine. You make the wineskin first.
Right.
You create the space for it to happen, and then you put the new wine in it. And so sometimes I wonder if God's not moving because we're not multiplying. If we were just to start things and send people out, and if people, within New Life and within my church network, if we start a new thing, God will move into that new thing. So I'm passionate about that and seeing people actually multiply so that we actually become a movement. You talked about a movement and how really institutions are not where it seems like God is moving, and I agree. And so it's like we need to kind of create the new context for the movement to take place instead of always trying to force it into our traditions and our idea of what God's going to do. That doesn't mean the old thing is bad.
No.
It means it needs to be ready to support what God's going to do that's new. So we can have a both and.
How frightening do you think new wineskins are to old wineskins? In other words, let me say it better. How frightening are the new things to the existing institution? And again, the institution is not a bad thing.
Yeah.
It came about for a good reason. It's done good work, and it's doing good work. But how frightening is that?
It's frightening. Yeah, some of it's the way we phrase it. Mm-hmm. So, for instance, if you could think of the most stuck in the mud church you could imagine, I bet they have a missions program.
Right.
And I bet they send money to some far off places so somebody can do ministry in an entirely different way than they do. They're not threatened by that. Why? Because they've caught in their mind the idea of mission and that there's people out here that need to hear it in a different way. So if we can also remember that's true even in our own communities. Right. All our communities are changing, they're adapting, it's becoming more and more secular. We all have the opportunity to sort of get behind those new wineskins starting.
What are the measuring points you would look at to say, because let me be honest, I've really couched this as institutions, say the Wesleyan Church or one of our colleges as the institution, but the church is an institution. Yeah. And the longer a church exists, New Life has been around for 55 years now.
There are old wineskin components to New Life, and as cool as it is.
Yes, this particular iteration of New Life that I pastor is almost 22 years old.
Yep.
Okay, it's an old wineskin. We've got, but it's not a bad one. At least I don't think so.
No, I was talking to the waitress this morning after we had brunch, and you had to leave early.
Yeah.
I was talking with her. She had never been to this church, but she had heard about it and heard that it was really cool, and people really loved it.
See, so
right? So it's a good thing.
Yes, but it's an old wineskin now because I'm an old dude, and so how would we know? What are the measuring points you would put out to say we've now moved back from institutions and we're now back into movement mode?
Yeah, there's sort of a macro answer and a micro answer. I'll give you the macro first. So in terms of the whole Wesleyan Church, there's sort of a definition that we use internally and one that is really understood in the world of multiplication and movement language. So internally, we talk about the Great Commission and the greatest commandments, which make perfect sense. It's something you talk about all the time. Love God, loves others is a shorthand way of talking about that. And certainly go and make disciples, teach and baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to obey everything I commanded you. So we say GC, that's Great Commission, and greatest commandment squared. That's what it means to really be the church. But the way we measure that is to say B 6% and M 6%. B is baptisms. You can measure baptisms. Somebody got wet, right? You can measure baptism and write their name down. And 6% is saying if you have 100 people, we would hope that in a year, 6 people are baptized. If you have 1,000 people, right? And so on and so forth. You do it. If we have 100,000 people in the old Wesleyan Church, how many people? We want to have that 6% level of, that means that we're really seeing that multiplication of souls. Then the M, 6%, is multiplication. That means if you have if you have 100 churches in an area, then we would hope to see 6 churches started in that 1 year. So if you do that, studies have shown on the multiplication side, you're not just adding, you're not plateaued, you're actually at the point where you're clipping at a movement level of multiplication, where you're not just replacing people that are dying or churches that are dying. You're actually starting to become a movement. That's the macro level. Want to hear the micro level?
Yes.
So for me, we have a micro church network.
Define right quick for me micro church.
So a micro church would just be a smaller kind of miniature version of church. It has the marks of what a church would be, but it's super simple, it's small, and it's safe for people to have conversations about Jesus.
Got it.
So in that kind of a setting, what we talk about is that we would want to see a real movement at a local level would be 100 of these micro churches or house churches or missional communities, 100 of them at the 4th generation within 3 years. So the idea there is that by 4th generation, we're not counting how many micro churches we have. We're saying how many micro churches have actually started that are the 4th generation down. So I started one, and then we sent out another one, and then they sent out one and that one, just like a family would have 4 generations in 3 years. Now that may sound impossible, but that is what's happening around the world where there's true disciple-making movements happening, where people unleashing the gospel in such a way that they're actually multiplying at such a fast clip that you can barely track. That's the dream.
See, but that's what I said earlier. Movements are they feel dangerous and they feel out of control because they're moving
you can't
so fast
control
you can't
that.
track them.
You cannot control that.
Yeah. So I got a question. So I know that movements like this are going on in, say, India or other places around the globe. Do you see any indication of a movement like that in North America?
It has not happened in North America. What I just described does not exist in this hemisphere, really. But it's happening in those places. You're right. India, it's happening in Asia in a few different places. I dream that it would happen. I want to prepare for it to happen. I want to certainly equip people in such a way that they could be a part of that. I'm not saying I'm going to be a part of that, but man, I want to be around as part of the old wineskins. I want to be around when it happens and support it, contribute to it, train for it, fund it if I have to, as much as I can, because that would be, if that's happening at a 4th generation level and people are coming to Christ that quick, I tell you what, Mike, our country would be radically changed like you would not believe.
Agreed.
And I don't know what holds us back other than maybe we're holding back the empowerment of people to really take the gospel and say, I should be discipling my neighbors, my classmates, the people I go to work with. I should be discipling. And if I could do that and become a true movement, that's what I want to see, and I want to see it before I die for sure.
I love the illustration you gave of grandparents. Grandparents don't get to do everything their grandkids do, but man, they get to revel in it. And I just hope that whether it's our denomination or whether it's our educational institutions or whether it's our local church, that we can, how do I say this, that we can trust the Holy Spirit to take care of us enough that we're secure so we can simply revel in what we see him doing next generation, even though we're the old wineskins. So thanks for talking to me today.